So when I was a kid, I was told countless times over that video games were terrible for my eyes, they would rot my brain, and they would completely detach me from reality. And now, 30 years on, not only am I still playing them, I'm actively recommending them to clients I'm working with who are either in pain or looking to develop athletic performance. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing some of the benefits that playing video games can have in your brain, as well as telling you why Mario Kart is my top choice when it comes to real-world transferability. One of the coolest things about video games is their ability to transport us between worlds. So we go from real life into a world that is completely imagined. And here we can act in ways that are either impossible or at least inaccessible to us in the real world. Now, the worlds that we go to might not be as advanced as our own, but the novelty that they provide helps to stimulate a part of our brain known as the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is involved in some really important things such as movement, focus, emotional control, ignoring distractions, and decision making. And these are also things that you need when you are dealing with injury rehab or high performance sport. And if you've been watching the channel for a while, you've probably heard us say several times over that skills are really not very transferable. You can't do one thing and expect that all of the decision-making skills you're going to have in this world will just automatically apply to another world. And so it is true that video games are not going to make you automatically better at athletics or pain management. But if you were to take a retrospective look at this and actually analyze how you play video games and how video games affect you, you can get some really good insights into how your frontal lobe is functioning and how it is likely to function. This is because when you put yourself into really over-the-top scenarios like you do when you're playing a video game, it forces your frontal lobe to work extra hard. Usually we don't notice these things because in our daily life, our frontal lobe is less active because we're relying more on our habits. When we're in the video game is drawing on all of our resources, so our frontal lobe action is going to be massively amplified. So let's use Mario Kart to look at some examples of this. So we'll start with the aspects that affect rehab and injury. Now, first up, we're going to look at something called mirror neurons. So we've said that the frontal lobe of the brain controls movement, but what's really weird is the line between real movement and imagined movement is actually really blurry at the layer of the brain. Every time that you think about performing a movement, neurons in the brain that control that movement are going to fire and light up. And the muscles that you would actually use to control that movement are also going to fire and light up as if you were actually doing the movement. Now, if you've ever sat and watched someone playing a video game, particularly a racing game, you will have seen this in action. When we're brand new to the game or when the stakes are high, stress levels are high, you see people twist and turn, they lean into the corners, even though that does nothing for the game. Doesn't matter how much you lean, it's not going to make you turn any sharper. The only movement that actually matters is what your thumbs are doing with the buttons and the joysticks. And this happens because in order to help us understand the rules of this new world that we're in the video game, our brain asks us to physically mimic what it wants us to do to help visually and spatially map out the environment. And in the real world, this also happens when we're under high amounts of stress or we are in physical pain. In these situations, the frontal lobe is struggling, and so the brain is going to find it harder to differentiate imagined and real movements. And so it forces us to just act out everything that we're thinking to keep things simpler. The problem is this is going to waste our energy, so we're going to end up with a lot of tension because our muscles are contracting and relaxing so much, and because of this, we're going to get really tired. What's more, we have tons of thoughts every single second, and a lot of them are going to contradict each other. So sometimes you're going to be thinking of several different types of movements that don't flow nicely together, and our body is going to just be firing those muscles, contracting in loads of different positions, and this can actually make our pain get worse. So this is the first way that we can use video games to help us through this, is to try forcefully relaxing your body while you're playing. See if you can minimize all of the movement apart from the absolutely crucial movements that need to happen. You want to be able to keep your whole body completely relaxed, not under tension, and not moving. A second key aspect of the frontal lobe is something called inhibition, and that's your brain's ability to ignore or say no to things. Have you ever noticed when you're in pain, stressed, or you're having a really bad day that you find it much harder to say no to things like sugar? Or you just say inappropriate things way more often? You say stuff that normally you would think, but be clever enough to not go ahead and shout out. This is because your frontal lobe is much less vigilant the further into fight or flight that you go. What's annoying is it's almost impossible to correct this while you're still in a fight or flight state. So one of the important things is you're gonna need to figure out a way to get yourself out of that state so you can then continue to practice appropriate inhibition. And this is another reason why those relaxation drills while you're playing the video game can come in really handy. Not only will they help your brain make the distinction between the real and imagined movements, they're also going to act to tell you to calm down a little bit. And games like Mario Kart can be really great for helping you to practice inhibition because they provide you with loads of different things that you can try and avoid. If you've ever watched somebody play, you've probably seen them drive right into a banana skin, and right the moment before they hit it, you finally see them start to try and swerve and avoid it, even though the track is absolutely huge and that obstacle was only occupying a tiny little space. And the reason for this is avoiding something is actually really hard to do. To effectively avoid something, your brain needs to first figure out what and where it is. It then needs to figure out what path it would take to hit it so it can plan an alternative route. That alternative route is essentially the inhibition. But we already know that when we plan the route, our brain actually fires the neurons and the muscles that it would take to go that way in the first place. And for most people, they just start acting on impulse, and by the time they've finished that little calculation, it's already too late. So they start to try and pull away, veer away, but they don't have enough time left. And while practicing this within the context of Mario Kart isn't necessarily going to automatically make it work when you're playing sport or when you are trying to resist fast food when you're injured and in pain, when you put conscious attention on this, you may start to notice what kind of mental state you need to be in to more effectively avoid these obstacles. And that is the kind of mental state that you're going to need to be in real life if you want inhibition to work at all. By consciously being aware of your state of mind, it makes it a little bit easier to transfer this into real life. Okay, now let's look at the performance aspects. And when it comes to improving your performance in video games, most gains are going to come from speed, namely being able to process information and make decisions much quicker. And this is why racing games are often better than most others. The higher the speed, the quicker these reactions you're going to need to have, and the quicker you're going to need to make the decisions. And the great thing about games like Mario Kart is there's often several things that are requiring your focus and attention all at once. Focus is an interesting system because we think that most of the time we are multitasking, but in reality, your brain cannot perform multiple tasks in your conscious attention all at once. It needs to switch between them. And the faster you switch, the sooner you're going to burn out. And this is where you usually see the difference between amateur and professional athletes. In games like Mario Kart, you need to place your focus on loads of things at once. There is the terrain, your opponents, the map, your position, obstacles, and weapons. And if you want to be able to keep your attention on all these things, you need a better system than quickly switching your focus between every single one at once. The better way to do this is to choose the more important thing to focus on, one thing that you want to focus on for most of the time, probably your driving, but at the same time, widen your peripheral vision to take in as much of the other information as possible. That way, when anything in any of those other places changes, you can quickly do a short little shift, change your focus, change it back when the danger is over. Now that might sound like it's something that should be really simple to do, but there's a bit of a paradox here because the higher your levels of focus and concentration go up, the higher your stress levels are also going to rise. That's just how it works in the brain. Unfortunately, as your stress levels rise, your peripheral vision tends to close in. And so the reason elite athletic level focus is so hard to achieve is it's not about just whacking your focus up to 1,000. Instead, what you need to do is get good at hovering on that balance line between the fight and flight systems and the rest and digest systems. You want to give yourself just enough focus that you can be concentrating well on what you're doing while keeping your peripheral vision as wide and open at all times as you possibly can. Of course, there's going to be some times when it needs to switch, and one aspect is going to need a high level of focus. That's going to shoot your stress levels up super high for a short amount of time. But then the next thing that you need to get used to is then calming down very, very quickly so your peripheral vision can open up again. And this is something that can be quite difficult to do in the heat of the moment in real life, but video games provide a really nice platform to giving you an understanding of how that works and what's going on so that you can then translate it into real life later on. So in the final note, we said that the frontal lobe was also closely connected with our emotions. We can use video games to influence this in two ways. So you'll remember that when we're talking about video games, we're looking at this a little bit retrospectively. We're not saying getting good at video games is automatically going to get you good in real life. The important thing is we want you noticing how playing video games affects all of these aspects of your frontal lobe. The big reason that we do this is because your frontal lobe and the emotional systems in your brain are really closely connected. And because of this, when you're in a situation where your emotions are running really high, it's really hard to focus explicitly on the actions of the frontal lobe. So when you're in pain, or when you're at work, or during sport, basically the majority of real life activities where your emotions might run high, you're going to find it way harder to consciously affect the decision making and focus and conscious movements performed by the frontal lobe. It's always going to be easier during video games to detach your emotions from the outcome than it is when you're in real life and the outcome actually really matters to you, especially when you're going into playing video games with the intention that you're going to try and control and manage your emotions as you play. Every time you get a flare-up, you just need to remind yourself, this does not matter. After a while, you start to make this a habit when you're playing the video games. You may start to find that even if you can't control it in real life, you might be able to catch yourself while you're doing it. And the second part of this emotional point is the reason why I think Mario Kart is better than pretty much every other game when it comes to training the brain. And that is because Mario Kart, just like real life, is horrifically unfair. Mario Kart has weapons like blue shells and lightning bolts programmed into it so that no matter how good you are, you can always just be thrown right into the middle or the back of the pack by some random event that had nothing to do with how good or bad you were performing in the first place. Training and managing your emotions in this instance is exactly how you get ahead in life. There will always be other athletes, friends, family, co-workers that are outshining your hard work and your achievements, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And no matter how much work and effort that you put in to mastering your own life, you're not going to be able to control what happens to everybody else. When that is happening to you in real life, and it's something that really matters a lot to you, that is one of the most difficult emotional situations you are ever going to have to deal with. It's one of the most common reasons people burn out or lose their passion or joy in their life, and it's something that very few of us were ever taught how to manage well. In fact, I believe that the majority of sports are driving many kids who perform at a high level into some crippling emotional problems because of the way they teach them to handle success against opponents. If anyone's interested in this, write interested in the comments and I will get working on a video to explain why. So again, while Mario Kart might not necessarily solve all of our problems in this regard, the fact that it gives you a scenario that is much less emotionally charged, where you can practice how you react in events like this, is really, really beneficial to your long-term health and happiness. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on how video games, and especially Mario Kart, can be beneficial to your brain with regards to injury as well as high performance. But what do you think? Do you agree with me? Are these skills really transferable in any way, even if you're doing it retrospectively, let me know what you think. And if you found this video interesting and you would like to further develop your abilities in terms of the frontal lobe as well as focus, you might want to check out the NeuroBand. The NeuroBand is a wearable training tool that helps to develop speed, accuracy, and skill by following basic neurological techniques. It uses vision and balance exercises to train the brain to process information faster and more accurately, giving you more time to coordinate and execute movement, apply strength and flexibility, or take aim at a target. The NeuroBand comes with two 15-minute workout programs designed to train your brain and nervous system using easy-to-follow exercises that can be done anywhere and anytime, making it the perfect addition to your training routine. So whether you're an athlete looking for an extra 1% or trying to stay focused at work, experience the difference with the NeuroBand and take the first step towards improving your performance today. You'll find a link to the NeuroBand in the video description. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.